Hello and welcome back to the channel. I am Jeremy of Brendle Concepts, for all of you that do not know that at this point. And today I am going to be starting a series of how-to videos that are going to tie into Project Rising Sun. So now I've had a lot of questions, a lot of really great questions about the process that I've been using to build all these parts. And the number one question I've been getting is really, how am I doing it? So when I first started this channel, I didn't really know what anyone wanted to see. So we just started putting stuff out there and, like I've been asking, ask questions, tell me what you want. And well, this is what I found out. A lot of people really want to know much more in depth and, how I'm doing this. So I decided to start with this series, and it's going to basically catch everyone up to speed as to where I'm currently at in the car. And the first thing that I'm going to do is start talking about prepping for a base panel. Now, the base panel is basically the fiberglass skin that I use to start my project. And the first thing that I have to stress is when we're talking about doing a moldless composite part like this, we're kind of changing our way of thought. You know, Typically what you're seeing out there is a lot of parts being made out of molds, and that's made for mass production. Big companies that are, producing body kits, all these things are basically a bolt-on application. What I'm doing here, it's a little bit different. So where we have to start is changing our thought process. We're not going to be laying up into a mold. We are starting from scratch. And I'm going to be using this headlight just for demonstration purposes. This is a non-functional headlight. I just keep it around because, it's got a cool shape to it. Or, these headlights, you see them on like Harley baggers, a lot of Jeeps. I can use something like this and, create a bezel or whatever I want. So yeah, I kind of keep parts like this laying around just so I can do different things with them. But we're going to use this just to start with a base panel. Now, before we actually lay fiberglass, you have to understand one thing. We are talking about working from inside out. If this was a car, like let's say a hood, a fender, a bumper, a winglet, a heat extractor, you name it, this is the part that we'd be starting from because we want to make something from this and create something new. The first absolute step, and this one I cannot stress enough, is to decide how we are going to mount our fiberglass after we lay it up. Typically on body kits that you see nowadays, like I said, they're bolt-on, and that's great. It's an easy way to put it on the car, take it off. When we're talking about a moldless composite part like this, it's a lot different. We are going to be either using something like 3M tape like this. That's a typical way. You see it a lot of spoilers that get 3M tape and, put the spoiler on, and that's how they lock it in. On Project Rising Sun, I am going to be using this 3M panel bonder. Now, I've been using this product for a long time. It's a great product. When it cures, it's pretty much bulletproof. This product does take a special applicator gun, but if you're going to be doing the job, you need the tools. So before we decide, to do our fiberglass, you have to determine how you're going to put your part on whatever it is you're going to attach it to. If you do not account for material thickness, like your tape or your panel bonder, and you were just to lay fiberglass over this, you would pull your fiberglass off. And then once you would put your 3M tape on there, or let's say your panel bonder, you would put your fiberglass back on, and yeah, it's not going to fit right because you've put material thickness in there that you haven't accounted for. So when we're talking about starting from scratch, you have to first and foremost, I cannot stress this enough, you have to decide how you're going to attach it. Now, 3M tape like this double-sided tape, this is pretty much a universal, use here. You see it all the time, moldings, like I said, spoilers, different parts on cars, they get double-sided tape. Now this stuff right here, it measures, I got my rule here, it's just under a 1/16 of an inch. So if I were going to start my base panel, and let's say I wanted to use a 3M double-sided tape, I would want to build up a 1/16 of an inch material over my surface that I want to fiberglass over to account for that thickness. Now, I'm using a panel bonder on Project Rising Sun, so we're going to mock up this headlight, basically get it ready for fiberglass, and I'm going to basically go on the premise that we're going to be using this panel bonder. Now, again, this is just for demonstration purposes to get you guys kind of understand the process and, the mindset that you have to have. I'm going to flip my camera around and try and work, overhead so that you can see directly what I'm doing. And again, if you guys have questions about this process, please let me know. I've been trying really hard to answer all the questions that I've been getting. Yeah, so let's get started on how to lay this up. Again, so our first step here is going to be use painter's tape. Now, you can use whatever you want, but I highly suggest that you get a really good quality painter's tape. I use, the Scotch Blue. I have used other tapes in the past, from various places. And this is one of those areas that you do not want to cheap out on. If you buy garbage tape, it is going to make your life miserable. I cannot tell you how many times I have ended up basically scrapping a part because, I thought I was saving a few dollars and really it just ruined the project. You want a painter's tape that's going to adhere good, but also remove easily. If you get, tape that kind of comes loose during the process, it can really mess up what you're doing. So again, this is one of those areas where I tell you, you do not want to cheap out. So this will be our base layer. We're going to use this tape and like I said, if you were using a 3M tape, you were going to, layer this up until you get to your close to 1/16 of an inch. And our final layer is going to be this foil tape. Now, if you've never done fiberglass before, you can, do a lot of different ways to get your fiberglass to release. There's release agents, there are so many products out there, but this one in particular I find works extremely well. Fiberglass will not stick to tin foil. It will not stick to this tape. The other reason I like it is because unlike tin foil, this has an adhesive. So this conforms really easily to any part that we want to put it on. Whereas like a tin foil, you have to, kind of work it around the part and then secure it in some way. So this just bypasses a lot of extra, unnecessary work. So having said all that, let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is basically grab my tape here and I'm just going to measure, wide of the part. I like to start in the very middle. That's just, it works the best for me. And this is one of those areas where people ask a lot of questions like, well, if it's not 100% smooth, like, is it going to matter? No, it won't, because you have to remember we're working from the inside out. The backside of the fiberglass is going to be, scuffed heavily before, if you were panel bonding, or, you're going to have to scuff it, knock down any edges before you're going to actually put your double-sided tape, not to mention you have primer in there or whatever. So again, this does not matter if you get lumps, bumps, whatever. We just want to try and do our best to smooth everything out. You can see I'm using a marker here. This is probably one of the best tools I found to smooth out this tape. Reason being, it's not going to rip anything. It's cheap. If you have a dried out marker, just save it. It works fantastic. The only thing I would suggest is, if it is dried out, take the cap off and throw it away. These little, the pocket holder here, that can catch on your tape and rip it, and you end up having to do it over. So this is the tool I use, and this is how I basically do it. So I'm just going to start in the center of my tape here, and I'm going to just start working it out towards the edges. You can see, I'm smoothing out any of the little wrinkles that I'm getting. I like to work it from the center, work to the sides. Again, I'm just pushing any kind of air bubble, whatever, towards the edge. Once I get that point, I'm just simply going to wrap my tape. The reason that I go, extra material is because if there's a surface that we want to protect from resin, we want to make sure that we're covering that. So if there's any, spillage or any leaking, or, a puddle will kind of run, you want to make sure that that product is, protected. If you were doing this on, let's say like a bumper or a hood, the last thing you want is your part stuck because you got resin that's stuck to your paint. So having said all that, again, let's keep going. The next thing I'm going to do, again, I'm just going to move down. Now this is one of those areas where I tell you, you don't want to do like a 50% overlap of your tape. It's going to create, a bulge. A little bit of an overlap is great. That's all we really need. So again, I'm just going to smooth out my tape here, work from the center. I'm going to come back over my edge, make sure that's really locked down. Then I'm just going to start working my tape. All right, you can see how I'm getting wrinkles here. Again, not a big deal. It doesn't really matter. Now, on this last section here, I kind of try and stretch it just a little bit. And because it's contoured, I want to make sure that I'm, getting onto that edge to protect it. And you can see I'm just going to use my marker, really go around that edge that I'm trying to lock in. When I get to this point, wrap our tape. All right. So now we're just going to, repeat the process here. The reason I like to start in a center like this is because it kind of like will stick the tape in place. Then from there, you can kind of work back out to the edges. If you try and start on an edge and you try and work, that way or this way, whatever the case may be, the tape will have a tendency to want to wander until it actually is locked down. So I really like to just lock down the tape and then work my edges. You can see how I'm just trying to push it. Again, just kind of walking around my edge a little bit. Fold it. Our last piece. The idea with this is you want to create as much of a level surface as possible. Remembering that we're, going to be building up to a material thickness. Now, the best way I know how to do that is crisscross. So, we ran our tape this way. Now I want to run my tape this way. And what that will do is kind of level out the surface a little bit as you build up your tape. Sometimes you'll run into a part that you just can't crisscross. It's just not possible. And that's okay. The main objective here is to build up our material thickness. We're not trying to make a pretty part. We're trying to make a surface that we can use the fiberglass onto. And you can already see how the lines are kind of, appearing, and that's the difference in material thickness. Now I can take my finger and I can kind of feel it, but it's not really something that I can feel. And, if you've never done any body work, there's one thing that I've learned over the years, and that is your eye sees a lot more than your hands can feel. If your hands can't feel it, it's good. Just because you visually see something doesn't mean it's wrong. So you got to get used to playing, with your hands here and really get a feel for what you're doing. Now I'm only going to do 2 layers here just because, you know, to keep taping this thing would just be redundant. This doesn't want to stick. The other thing that I want to say about using a good tape is when you use a cheaper painter's tape, it doesn't want to stick to itself very well. Unless you're trying to tape it off the roll or tear it off the roll, in which case it's guaranteed to screw you up. But when you want it to stick, it probably won't. So again, this is one of those areas that I can't stress enough. Buy the good stuff. When I'm wrapping things around an edge, I like to start from the center, and I just like to work out. Just as easier that way for me. You know, for you, however you want to try and do it, it's up to you. I'm a big believer in that, you know, what I do is what I do, and how you do it is how you do it. There's no really right or wrong way in fabrication to me. The end goal is what's important. The process, you know, materials used, really not so as much. I've trained a lot of people over the years, and the number one thing that I try and teach them is that the right way and the wrong way, you can kind of throw that out the window, because once you learn a process, you're going to develop your way. So the most important thing is learn the basics, learn how to use a part, a product, a tool, and from there, adapt it into your way, your method, whatever it is that you see fit, so that you can get the job done. Now this one I'm kind of making ugly, but you can see as I get to this point right here, I can put pressure on it, I can smooth it out. Again, not a big deal. All right, this is where I'm going to stop, because like I said, this would just be redundant. So now, again, keeping with my crisscross pattern, I'm going to lay my aluminum tape this way just because I'm trying to keep a somewhat level surface. Now, this is HVAC tape. You can pick this up anywhere, you know, Lowe's, Home Depot, wherever. The only disadvantage of this stuff is the backing on it, the adhesive, I should say, is extremely strong. So you don't want to, you know, let it fold over on itself. You kind of have to understand that where you put it is where it's going to stay. Trying to take it off the painter's tape, you're probably most likely going to end up pulling the painter's tape with it. It's pretty good stuff. So just remember, when you're handling this stuff, you kind of want to set it right the first time. So I'm just going to go about here. All right. Now, again, working from the center, I'm just going to lock this tape in, and then I'm going to start working to my edges. The nice thing about this foil tape is it conforms a lot better than your painter's tape. So anything that was in the painter's tape that you didn't necessarily like, there's a good chance it will just go away. So you can kind of see my lines through the aluminum tape here, or the foil tape here. You can see these lines of, the painter tape underneath it. Again, I'm running my finger over it. I can slightly feel it. If you were to continue to build up in one direction consistently or overlap, you would have much bigger ridges. Again, it's not the end of the world, but the idea is to try and create as much of a uniform surface as possible. The reason being, it will help your part fit in the end much better. All right. Here again, I'm not going like a crazy overlap, but I do want to make sure that I'm overlapping enough that we're bonding tape to tape, because this is basically our last barrier or our last line of defense against that resin from seeping into the part that we're using for our mock-up. And you can see as the contour of the headlight, starts to get more, you can see the edge here, how it really wants to crinkle up. And it's not a big deal. I'm just going to keep working it. This tape is a lot more forgiving than people would realize. I mean, I've had people that were really hesitant to use it because they're like, oh no, it's kind of like metal. Well, no, it conforms very well. And because of its, properties, it's a lot easier to shape and smooth out. So this is a really good product to use. Again, I'm wrapping my edges to protect everything that I don't want resin on, because if you've done fiberglass or you haven't done fiberglass, you will find out resin goes where resin goes, and there's nothing you can do about it. All right, last piece here. Getting the back off of this sometimes can be so much fun. But I will say this, when we're talking about making these parts, the last thing you want is all this tape work to come loose when you're, in the fiberglass process, because at that point it's pretty much game over and you got to start over. So here we go. You can see how I start working to that edge, basically the lens of the headlight, and you can see how nice it really holds that line. This is definitely a trial and error thing for me. The stuff that I do now, like this moldless composites, this has been around for decades. I mean, I've traced it back to like the 30s, where they called it wire frame and foam board. And I basically learned how to do it from that, and I adapted it into my own style of fabricating. So nothing I'm doing here is, groundbreaking new stuff. This stuff's been around for decades, like I said. But, it's like anything else in fab. You learn something, a skill set, a way of doing something, and then you kind of add it to your arsenal of capabilities. I've found over the years that a lot of stuff that I've learned in metalworking translates really well into fiberglass. I personally use fiberglass almost like I would, use steel. in the same context of like building from the inside out. So that's just kind of, how I do things. But again, how you do it, that's up to you. That's the beauty of it. All right, this will be our last piece. Now I'm just going to take one last spin around the whole part. Make sure everything is good and locked down. Make sure the edges are good. And that's it. This is pretty much the end of your prep to lay a base panel. So I'm going to stop now, and we're going to do another video of actually fiberglassing this thing. I'm going to split all these videos up so that if you want to save them, come back and watch video by video, you can do that. So yeah, stay tuned. We'll do the next one.